Right, today we're talking about items that I see way too often being built relatively early in an item build, both in Conquest and other modes, and I think are usually not really suited for that early purchase in a game, and I want to address that in this video. Some of these items will be role specific, many of them depend on certain circumstances, but overall most of them should not be bought early in most situations. The first one is going to be a support item, and this literally goes for every single game mode. And that's Breastplate of Valor. A Breastplate of Valor is a great item, and it is especially great in solo lane, and there is not too much of a reason not to rush it there. We'll address solo lane a little later. But on support, this item is vastly overrated by many. The item itself is relatively expensive. It is more expensive than most standard support items, and in terms of stats, it provides relatively little that a support can make a lot of use from early. It has 65 physical protection, which is not bad, and it has 20% cooldown reduction, and the cooldown reduction is why people buy it. However, cooldown reduction on a support early on is not that important. It is great, and certain supports really make use of it, for example Athena or Gap. But really, what you want early on are protections, ideally an aura for your team, some sort of HP 5, some health definitely, and this item doesn't really provide all of that at the same time. You're very vulnerable to magical damage when you build this early, and aside of you taking longer to get to the next item anyways, which means that you can basically just sit in your lane, and you can basically just try to, well, zone the ADC if it's a physical ADC, whereas the enemy support, if he's not a warrior, will also deal a lot of damage to you. And there's just no benefit in it. If you have health early on, then you have some sort of, well, buffer against both sorts of damage, magical and physical, as well as true damage, and that's what you should be looking for. Yes, physical defense should be valued higher than magical defense in most situations because you have the minions and the structures and everything dealing physical damage, but that doesn't mean that Breastplate of Valor alone is enough to keep you standing. And I so often see supports rushing CDR boots into Breastplate of Valor just to get all that cooldown reduction, but then getting blown up first in every team fight because they really don't have anything against any sort of other damage. And realistically, that defense alone is also not that much. When you consider that Sovereignty is 200 gold cheaper, has almost the same protections, and has 200 health on top of that, and has 25 HP 5 on that, you will understand that this item just doesn't provide the same stats as Sovereignty when it comes to tankiness for a frontliner early in the game. There's no harm in building it later, but it shouldn't be the first item you rush without having any effective health. If you really think you have to rush it, then at least build Mark of the Vanguard beforehand to get some more effective health and some sort of defense against other damage due to the damage mitigation that you have then. In the same sense, this applies to every mode outside of Conquest. You're always going to be frontlining against multiple types of damage, and as such, Breastplate of Valor is not gonna cut it. For solo laners, it's a bit different because you can end up in a matchup against a physical solo laner and the physical damage dealing minions, and then it's absolutely okay. I would say at the moment Gladiator's Shield makes it, well, a little less worthy of a pickup for many. There's a lot of competition for the item now, more than before, but that doesn't mean that it's bad for solo laners now and it can still be picked up. The next one is one for mages, and that is Chronos Pendant. Now, Chronos Pendant is a great item, and in Season 2 it was very much justifiable to build it early on. I always thought there were better options, but it was a decent item. Now it is nothing that you should be picking up early. Chronos Pendant is extremely expensive, 2,900 gold. We're getting close to Rod of Tahuti here. It has only 60 magical power, some MP5, 20% cooldown reduction, and the passive that really gets its full use when you already have full cooldown reduction, which you will not have when you build Chronos Pendant most of the time. If you do have CDR Trinket, Sense of Time, and CDR Boots, and Chronos Pendant, then you would have max CDR, but that would mean that you have no pen and not enough damage for anything, and then the CDR would be completely irrelevant because no one would care about your abilities. So what you want to do is you want to have some other higher damage items first that are usually cheaper as well in order to get your early game going, in order to not struggle in the early stages of the game because of a lack of power, because of a lack of flat penetration or anything like that, and then build Chronos Pendant towards the end of the game when you have your core build done and are just looking for an item to finish off your build when you have enough power and you're really concerned with hitting that max CDR cap. that should not be the first thing you're looking for. And effectively, you're delaying any power spike, anything of that sort you could have had, anything you could have stacked in favor of a very expensive item that does not do that much early on. In the same sense, because it apparently has to be said, Rod of Tahuti is not the first item you should be building after boots either. Rod of Tahuti has a lot of power, but the overall stats are nothing that do much for you early game. Flat penetration is not on there. There's no real CDR, no anything that would really make it justifiable to pick it up like earlier than 4th slot. You want some penetration, ideally some percentage pen most scenarios beforehand. And you want maybe some stacking stuff or something, some flex slot, something with a little defense, anything like that, but not Rod of Tahuti. It is just way too expensive, and this sounds like not that much of a problem, but really the price curve can mean so much, especially in a game where you fall behind, that effectively it will put you in a very, very bad spot if things don't go 100% according to plan. And even then, there are still better options. The next one is one that's a little more debatable because, well, it has been picked up in the Pro League, but I would still argue against picking it up in most situations, and that is Spear of Desolation. This item has 80 magical power, 20 magical penetration, so it has some flat penetration, it has some cooldown reduction as well, 10%, and it has that passive which is, you know, kinda nice. Overall, I would say it's not trash, but it is very, very expensive. 2,800 gold, and you have to consider if it's really worth building that for you. You definitely want penetration boots beforehand, so you're not, well, missing out on everything until this item is finished, and mostly you would find better options. I would even go as far as saying that despite of its nerf, a Pythagorum's piece is still a better option than this. And also, if you're looking for penetration, you might as well consider Obsidian Shard, which is a lot cheaper. It doesn't have like the same stats in its entirety, but it still has good stats, while only costing 2,300 gold. The percentage pen is something that gears it a bit more towards late game, so usually you want another item in between. So in that regard, there is a point to be made for Spear of Desolation, but realistically, it still has 60 power, it has that pen, and you're just missing out on the CDR, so might as well put a CDR power item in between, and then get Opsi, and you would probably be better off than with Spear of Deso in most situations. Like I said, there are outlier situations here where it's actually good, but that's rare compared to, say, the standard items that you would build around that time, such as stacking items. It is worth mentioning that Gem of Isolation is very close to Spear of Desolation in price. We're talking about 2,700 gold here, 100 gold difference. However, I do think, despite of the, well, relatively insignificant price difference, Gem of Isolation has much more of a reason to be picked up early on, and that is basically Poseidon. It's not so much about many gods being able to pick it that early, but Poseidon just makes such an excellent use of that item that there I would say, hey, okay, I can see why you're building it early. And for some gods, it's just nice to have that extra health. Kukulkan, for example, as well, if you're looking for that. But even with him, I would stack something else first. The next one is Telekaine's Ring. Not much to say here. Just get Demonic Grip first. The Telekaine's Ring costs 2,800 gold. It doesn't have any penetration on its own, and it's a very late game oriented item in itself. It works better when you already have some attack speed, so you stack it faster anyway. So just build it late game. This item screams late game. Don't build it earlier. The next item is Bloodforge. Bloodforge is one that I always see being picked up, and there are actually arena players who want to justify that it's a good early pickup in arena because it has a lot of power and blah blah blah. Bloodforge is not an early game item. Yes, Bloodforge has a lot of power, but that's where it ends. Lifesteal is nice, but it's usually not that important. It's not the reason people buy it for anyways, and I see it over and over on Hunters as a first item, on Assassins as the first item after boots, and it's not good for that. Especially Assassins want CDR and penetration early on. Hunters always want some sort of penetration as well, maybe some attack speed, depending on the build really. But Bloodforge is just one of the most expensive items for either of them out there, with relatively little direct impact on the DPS at that point. Bloodforge becomes better when you have penetration, when you really make use of the power, but that's just not something that would happen early on. And the passive itself is also nice, but it's not going to matter when you're still farming up. It's going to be something that helps a lot more when you're towards the point of the game where you can actually snowball. The last item here is Hastened Fatalis. Now, Hastened Fatalis is an early pickup. This is more specific than the others. What I want to talk about here is Hasten Fatalis before anything else. Some people will build Hasten Fatalis before boots on Freya, for example. This is more justifiable than it used to be. Last season it was just a very bad idea, but now this item actually has a 10 flat penetration, so I wouldn't judge people for doing so. However, I would like to remind you that it's worth keeping in mind that the item still has no power, which is important when it comes to clearing early, especially when you think about hunters or something like that, where you should really get boots first. And also you have to keep in mind that it costs 2,150 gold, so effectively you're putting yourself behind your enemy's farming curve when he has his boots, or the power curve rather. And I don't think it's worth it in most situations. The attack speed alone is not gonna allow you to clear, and you're not gonna be boxing that much with just one item. You're just not gonna be there, going in there with your starter item in Hasten Fatalis and be like, hey, I'm gonna chase you down the whole lane in 99% of the scenarios, because you're really too busy farming. And even in game modes outside of Conquest, this realistically doesn't change all too much. Even in Arena, you're not gonna hunt down people with your Hasten Fatalis and nothing else. It's just not gonna happen. That's not how it works with this item. It really wants you to have some base stats, some damage stats, to have some oomph between your hits, and then you get that Hasten Fatalis to stick to them and really make their life agony. That's it for this video. If you think I forgot any item, please mention it down below. If you want to debate about any of these items, you can do so as well. See you for the next video tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Sloth out.